Lorcana fans can be prone to overhyping cards when they get revealed. We're all guilty of it. But today, we're going to look at the times where cards got revealed, the player base got absolutely skits, and then it turned out those cards had no competitive impact on our metagame. It's going to be a fun video. Let's begin. Now, this is the card that I've personally played the most that will feature in this video. The Striking Illusionist is a 7-cost evasive character with 4 strength and 5 willpower, but a pitiful 1 lore. However, despite that, Jafar will be generating a ton of lore for you, just in a different way. Power Beyond Measure lets you gain 1 lore whenever you draw a card while Jafar is exerted. This, as you can imagine, can get out of hand very fast, with Amethyst already having a ton of draw cards, like Maleficent to draw 1, Chernobog's Followers to draw 1, Rabbit to draw 1, Friends to draw 2, and Blue Fairy to draw 1 every time you play a Floodborn, and if you're feeling particularly splunky, you've got Second Star on the right to draw 5. These can all net you a ton of lore over the course of the game while Jafar is out. The big flashy play though is singing a whole new world with Jafar, since this would net you 7 lore immediately in a single turn. Meaning if you can sing a whole new world twice with Jafar out, you pretty much win the game, just by weaving in a couple extra cards to draw via Friends on the other side or Blue Fairy for example. This would make the 3-step shift possible, and often used, since you could go from the 2-cost Jafar, which could attack evasive characters by the way, into the 4-cost Snake Jafar, and then into the 7-cost as well. When this card was revealed, people, including me, lost their minds, since the obvious synergy between this and a whole new world was so obvious. Being paired with Metal 2 meant you could play other super strong cards like Tinkerbell and all-out damage cards like Smash, so your opponent couldn't just steam ahead while you were waiting to get Jafar out. But with all that being said, Jafar hasn't really done anything too dangerous in the competitive metagame. It just takes too long to come out realistically. And turns out purple decks really didn't need those massive spikes of lore to win the game, since when it's paired with Ruby, we already have a tier 1 deck on our hands, and the Jafar package was just taking up too much space to make it work any other way. I do however think there is potential for Jafar though, so let's keep an eye out. OTK Beast. The community was in a proper tizzy about this one. This was set to be Lorcana's first realistic 1-turn win deck, where you could sit for 0 lore all the way until turn 7, and then you would just win instantly without your opponent being able to do anything about it. The main combo piece was this Beast card. With its second win ability, it can ready up whenever one of your opposing characters is damaged. So in theory, you could use it to keep challenging and clear your opponent's board. Fun, but not really game breaking. The fun is when you consider you can keep questing with it over and over and over again, as long as your opponent's characters keep taking damage. So how would we do that? Well, this is where the fun begins. The Bayou is a location card that would let you draw and discard a card whenever someone quests while they were there. This meant Beast could keep questing, drawing and discarding whenever it was there. That's cool, it's handy, but if there wasn't any damage being placed while this was going on, the Beast just gets stuck, so he couldn't really get into the loop. But then when you introduce Sheriff of Nottingham, he would step in and save the day, since whenever you discard a card from your hand, you can place 1 damage on one of your opponent's chosen characters. And this is how the loop starts, because when Beast is at the Bayou and quests, you can draw a card, and then you would discard a card. That would activate Sheriff of Nottingham to place 1 damage on one of your opponent's characters, and then when you did that, Beast would ready up, who would then just quest again. You would draw a card, discard a card, Sheriff activates, and this cycle goes on and on and on until you win the game. As long as your opponent has 10 willpower on board, you can just spam this little loop 10 times to win in a single turn. That sounds pretty crazy, right? And as you can see here on Beast price graph, you can see exactly when the player base cottoned onto this. And the price got crazy. People were terrified that the format would just become Beast OTK fests. OTK stands for 1-turn kill, in case you're wondering. And for good reason. It seemed, pretty easy to do, and it seems as if it was very hard for your opponent to stop it. Except that didn't happen at all. Beast price went straight back down to normal, and it just turns out the strategy was just too easy to play around, and you insta-lost if your Beast got removed before it could do anything. And with there being a ton of removal, it wasn't really that hard to remove that beast before it could start questing. Sad times. It's easy to see why everyone got excited about this one. One of the first 4 lore characters. Evasive and very strong stats too. Super scary card. And with the whole bounce core being released in the same set, all eyes were on the Madam Mim and Merlin cards. Almost all the Merlin cards see play. One of them getting you an extra lore when you play it, and when it gets removed too. One giving you draw power in the same way. One would boost strength. These all combo stupidly well with the Madam Mim cards too, who had absurdly high stats for their costs, like a 2 cost, 2 strength, 2 willpower snake, or this 4/3 rush fox. In order to balance these out, these cards would force you to return a character from your hand when you play them though. This can sometimes be an advantage for you though, since you could use it to heal cards or protect cards from being challenged. This drawback got dialed up though when it came to the Madam Mim Dragon, who needed to return 2 characters back to your hand in order to play it. And while the dragon's very strong and very flashy, being forced to return 2 cards was just the nail in the coffin. It was just too much of a drawback for Amethyst decks to use reliably. Because even though you could realistically get to 7 ink pretty easily, you couldn't always guarantee that when you did get there, you would have 2 characters in play to return back to your hand because, you know, you're in be prepared range at this time. And in that scenario, this card is useless. And that was Dragon's biggest problem. It was just too expensive, and having to return 2 characters was just backbreaking. All while being at the stage of the game where you were vulnerable to removal too. It's sad times for the Dragon realistically. This hidden archer bell looks terrifying on face value, peaking at a value near $100. 3 lore with 3/3 stats on a shift 3, I tell you what, actually isn't that bad either, but more on that later. With the downright ridiculous Thorny Arrows ability that meant whenever your bell is targeted via a challenge and banished, your opponent has to discard their entire hand. This is silly, and quite honestly wins games if it ever goes through. And because your opponent can't just keep letting you quest for free the entire time, they will need to challenge it eventually, right? And if they did, they have to discard their hand, which means they can't realistically deal with any of your other characters, so you should win, right? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. What can they do? Well, if removal didn't exist, then maybe this card would have been a meta definer. But unfortunately, removal does exist. And in a pretty big way, with cards like Madam Medusa, Lady Tremaine, Brawl, Dragonfire. It's just so rare that your opponent would ever activate Thorny Arrows. And if you missed your shift chance to get it into play, so you had to wait till turn 5, your opponent might just be playing off top decks at this point anyway, so its discarding the whole hand value is now null and void. Speaking of shift though, there really isn't many good shift options for Bell. The 3 cost 1 is okay, and has some synergy with Thorny Arrows, sure, but it's uninkable. The best shift option is probably Morph, and luckily for Bell they are the same colour. This all leaves the Hidden Archer pretty hidden from the competitive meta game. Mickey Mouse Trumpeteer. Now I couldn't believe my eyes when this card got revealed. Mickey Mouse Trumpeteer can exert, pay 2 ink, and then you can play any card you like from your hand for free. Now it's pretty easy to see how this could be amazing, right? You could use this to play a 10 cost Goofy for free. Loving it. You could play a big Maleficent to get a huge beat stick on board and remove something at the same time too. Yeah, that's pretty good, right? Or you could use it to play a beast who can redirect all damage to himself, keeping your Trumpeteer safe. You know what? That seems good to me too. With all that being said though, Trumpeteer has failed to do anything in a competitive meta game. Sad times, but I think this is quite obvious for a few reasons. The first is that it just comes in too late. Being your 4 ink turn and you can't actually use it till the next turn, it's just way too slow. By this time, you are well into your big boy end of the curve, playing cards like Tinkerbell, Robin Hood for example. And especially if you're playing a blue deck by turn 4 or 5, I mean, woo, you are slamming down big boy Tamatoas. And while we're here, that Sound the Core 2 ink cost can really mess up your curve as well. Because even on your turn 5, you now have to use 2 ink to use Sound the Call, so now you only have 3 ink to do with the rest of your turns. I mean, you can manage it, it's just awkward. And the way that Trumpeteer affects your deck building can just make things really awkward to play too, since now you have to play an abnormal amount of high cost cards to make him worth it. And that can really affect your consistency, since you might start the game with a ton of cards like 6 cost or over. That could get very awkward very quick. And funnily enough, the way that Metal Blue plays the game now, it has no problem in flooding the board with high cost characters like Tamatoa or max value Belle, Strange but Beautiful, all without the help of Trumpeteer. I mean, sure, you probably could fit it into that deck just for the banter, but realistically, it's just not optimal. If you like that video, why don't you like the video and consider subscribing? And why don't you watch this video here, where we look at the biggest victims of Lorcana's power creep.